Here we are at Thanksgiving week. I cannot believe how this month has just flown by, and I'm really looking forward to Thanksgiving. I hope you are as well. I'm also looking forward to after Thanksgiving is when I'll make the transition to all the Christmas stuff. That does not mean that I haven't listened to some Christmas tunes, but I still have my couple of pumpkins sitting out on my porch and some fall colors and just some decor. Not a lot, but I'm looking forward to making that transition. But with Thanksgiving this week, it means that the day after Thanksgiving is Black Friday. And so let's celebrate the fact that this week, and especially on Friday, you can get some really great deals on some things that you have had your eyes on. If you have been looking at your homeschool blueprint or the tidy home, or maybe this is your first introduction to it, I want to let you know that this week only, in celebration of a tidy home, you can get 35% off each course. Now, if you just want one of them, go ahead and grab one. If you want both, you can get both of them, and each of them will have a 35% savings when you use the coupon code Black Friday 2024. You can get all the information about your homeschool blueprint at littlebylittlehomeschool.com/blueprint. And the tidy home you can get at littlebylittlehomeschool.com/tidyhome. Those links, as always, are in the show notes for you as well. But don't miss out on that 35% savings for this week only up through this Saturday, November 30th. Now, let's jump into today's episode and talk a little bit about, is your homeschool child, are they behind in their home education?
Welcome to Little by Little Homeschool Podcast, where you'll learn tips and strategies that will empower you to home educate your children. I'm Leigh Nguyen, a homeschool mom of over 12 years, which includes 2 graduates. When I started homeschooling, I was pretty much on my own and was desperate for encouragement and help. My mission is to be a source of encouragement and help to you. Whether you are just beginning your homeschool journey or you're deep into the homeschool lifestyle, Little by Little Homeschool wants to help you stay the course, because all the time you are investing into your children is completely worth it. If you're ready to take your homeschool to new levels, keep listening.
Is your child behind? How many times have you thought of that question to yourself? How many times has that thought been in the back of your mind, lingering there? How many times has it come out of your mouth to maybe saying it to your husband or saying it to your kids or saying it to somebody else? How many times have you been asked this question of, is your child behind? How are they keeping up with things? That's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to settle this hot topic so that you can move on. That is the point of this. Let's talk about it, get it out there in the open, work through it, and then move on. Move on in freedom and spend your time focusing on your children, their education, your relationships, your relationship with them, as well as with your husband and your family as a whole, and all of the good things that God has for you, instead of dwelling on the fear and the worry and the anxiety about wondering if your child is behind. I've got a story that I'm going to share with you about my own struggle with this, and it took me years to get over it. When I started homeschooling, there was very limited homeschool resources. I didn't know about a lot of things, and really it was probably maybe my first half of my homeschool years, probably up through 5, 6 years, and then I began to be exposed to more and more. But my daughter started out with homeschool here in 3rd grade, and I was very connected with those that were in the school system and her friends' moms, and had gotten the curriculum, and we're going through it, and at some point, I don't know if I got curious or I saw one of her friends' homework or heard something, but there was something in the language arts that I was like, "We haven't covered that," and that's what they're doing in the public school right now. So she had been in public school, kindergarten, 1st, and 2nd grade, and had been following that model, so therefore, of course, she could not be behind. She is right on target. And so I got this crazy idea in my head that since they were doing whatever this topic was, I don't even remember what it was, she must be having to do that as well. I don't even recall whether I looked through the curriculum to see if we were getting to that or not, but I went online and I found some worksheets, and in the middle of the language arts program, I was like, this is what we have to do. And I was doing that in addition to the language arts program, in addition to the math, in addition to all the things that I thought that we had to do. And it didn't quite fit in quite well. I didn't really quite know what I was teaching and how I was teaching. It didn't really quite click, but we did it anyway. And I said, whew, I dodged a bullet on that one. Good thing that we did that. Now she will not be behind. Turns out, at some point in the next few months, at least before the end of the school year, we covered that. We covered that very topic within her language arts program, and it fit in perfectly to the sequence that the language arts program had. I didn't have to try to cram it in, and that's when I began to say, "Oh, huh, okay, maybe I can trust these other curriculum resources a little bit," because to me, the bar was the school system. And I continue to do that here and there, though. I would just add something to the curriculum out of fear, out of worry that they are missing out on something that the school system is doing right now, and therefore my child is going to be behind. Maybe you don't have a story or scenario quite as extreme, or maybe yours is a little bit more extreme, but I bet that somewhere in that story, you can hear yourself, even if it is in the panic or the worry or the fear that I had. And so I want to ask you a question. Is that even a thing? Really ask yourself, okay, if I believe that being behind is a thing, then behind what? Behind whom? Ask yourself that and answer those questions. Maybe you do have an answer, and then you have to ask yourself, is that a rational answer? Or is that something that is just coming from a place of fear? Most of the time, when we ask ourselves, behind what? Or behind whom? What are they behind? Our answer typically is behind the public school. Will say they're not doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing because that is the arbiter of truth. That is the plumb line is the public school system. And just like I told you that story, we eventually did get to that. So say it's just something very simple, very I don't want to say silly, but just something small that just it becomes a small thing, but at the beginning it's a very big thing. Learning maybe where to put a period in a sentence. And I know that the language arts was beyond that. But say that was it. And you're like, "How come they're not introducing that? How come they're not introducing that? I better get on to teacherspayteachers.com and find a worksheet and pay for that worksheet and download it and print it out and do that." And then only to find out that in a couple weeks in the program that you have at home, they're going to learn where to put a period into a sentence, how to end a sentence. So we can just get so caught up and just think that what the school system is doing, that is the best thing. Guess what? I'm just going to tell you right here. And from what I see, it sounds scary at first, but it's actually has a very bright spot. And the fact that the school system, I mean, we know as homeschoolers, we know that it's not great. And I can almost guarantee you that the people in the school system know that it is not great. But they're like, well, this is what we have. So this is what we must continue to do. The school system, my friend, is beginning to fall apart. It is not a long proven fact that the way that we educate and test and measure and evaluate children is something that is successful. It's actually the opposite. For most of history, kids have not been learning like this. And if you really open your eyes and open your ears and pay attention to the chatter within your communities, within people that you interact with, whether it's homeschooling, outside of homeschool, you might start to hear it. You're definitely going to hear it on social media. You're going to hear it on YouTube. You're going to hear it. I just see it in stories and reels on Instagram and Facebook. More and more people are starting to poke holes into the school system and starting to admit, maybe it is not perfect. Maybe it is not this huge, wonderful lowercase g God that we have made it. And the school system is beginning to fall apart. And I think that our children in their generation and their lifetime are really going to see the holes really poked into it. And I think more and more are going to begin to home educate. Now, this podcast is focused on Christian homeschool moms. Obviously, anybody can listen to it. But most of us homeschool because we want to be able to pour theological truth into our children. We want to honor and glorify God, and we want to give them a biblical worldview. More people are going to homeschool not because of that, but just because they're going to see the failure and the holes that are in a school system and how it's not equipping their children for the future. And so the school system, I really believe, is beginning to fall apart. There's going to be diehards. There's going to be people who are going to stay with it for as long as possible. And politics are definitely going to get involved here. And I think that at some point there is going to be like is it a knockdown, drag out? James laughs. I get those types of phrases and things mixed up all of the time. What did I say the other day? I said, like, free and fancy free. He's like, no, it's footloose and fancy free. And I was like, yeah, that too. But I think that this is going to come to a head at some point and it might get ugly. And so I'm going to encourage you when it begins to get ugly, just to put your head down and continue to do what you need to do, what your family needs you to do, and let it get ugly out there. Don't let it get ugly in your relationships with people. But I believe that it is starting to fall apart. Those that are looking at education differently have been taking um, the brunt of anger from people saying, well, you're not equipping your kids and they're going to be a failure and they're going to be a mess and therefore our society is going to be as well. But in the end, those that are deciding to home educate, it's going to work out. I promise you that it will work out. And just like the 2020 narrative, it was not popular to speak out against things. Ask me how I know. It was not popular at all. And you were possibly demonized. People, you lost relationships and friends just for asking some questions, even, or saying, no, thank you. I don't think I want to go along with that. Just like that, those who are saying things about the school system, in the end, hopefully we are vindicated to a degree. But I'm going to drop some links in the show notes for just some different episodes I think are going to really encourage you in this aspect when you're looking at it. And this podcast episode is not meant to be something to put down the school system, but I think that we really do use that as the deciding factor. And if you stop and really look at the school system, how do they measure success? How do they measure the fact that the kids that are in there are not behind? Well, there's report cards, right? You probably had those going to school, and the kids that are in school still have report cards. There's different levels, there's grades, there's levels for specifically for some of the subjects such as math and for your reading. There is comparisons when it comes to, oh, you got an A, you got a B, and different metrics like that. There's test scores, right? You have to take some tests, whether it's a subject test or it's bigger tests. There's just a lot that you have to, as a child in the school system, you have to be measured by those things. And that decides whether you are ahead or right on target or behind. And the kids that are possibly too behind get put down into lower levels, or they might be kept behind and have to repeat a grade. Although I am told by and large, a lot of those kids are just pushed through. Back in my day, you were left behind. You were literally left behind in that class, and the rest of your class moved on, and you had to redo a grade. But more and more, they're just moving kids along and just shuffling them along, and which is really sad because if they're not able to read well, instead of just moving them along, guess what? You're going to find yourself as a middle schooler, a high schooler, still not being able to read well. And so that is where home education can come in and really support a child where they exactly are. And so the school system makes us think that all of these measurements that they have, the report cards and the test scores and the grades and all the levels, they tell us that this is what shows whether a child has success or not. And every single child that is in the school system has some type of report that just follows them along. All of those assessments. Think about the parent teacher conferences that you go into. And I went to a couple of those. I hated it. I thought it was just kind of demeaning. And sometimes you'd go in and they'd have you sit in like a little chair and speak to you as if you were just a little mere peon of a person. I'm like, no, no. I gave birth to this child. I know this child. Nobody loves them and cares about them more than I do. And I'm not saying all teachers are like that. I had some friends that in school and college and stuff that were teachers, wonderful people. And so I'm not saying that, but just there are. And there's always going to be bad apples in different places. And that's just kind of is what happens in any place that you're working at. But I was just kind of annoyed that I have to go first I have to find childcare for them. Now at that point, my husband was working, like, odd shifts and stuff, and he wasn't available. So I had to find babysitter for my kids so I can go in and someone can tell me about my child, which is all stuff that I probably already knew. Now my older daughter, it was like, "Oh, she's just so wonderful." I'm like, "Great." So I did all of this work to get her for this. And then my son it was only 1 year of teacher parent-teacher conferences, and I heard about all the bad things that he did and how he was a bad kid. And I was like, "He's not a bad kid. He's just a five-year-old boy." So we are just told with the school system that if you just start off in kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade, and go all the way through, your child will not be behind and they will be fully prepared for life. And oftentimes with kids, we start to see that this really beats them down. Now, some kids are going to rise to the occasion and they are going to be above and they are going to be in the top of their class and they're going to have all straight A's and they're going to school well. But then there's going to be kids who do not school well. Does not mean that they're dumb, doesn't mean that they are behind. It just simply means that the system is does not work well with their brain. It's not how they're inclined to actually learn. So I think you have gotten my point probably. My main point is that there is no behind because our children are individuals. I saw this with my daughter. I saw her in school. I saw the fact that she just was stressed out. Here she was, 7, 8 years old, crying about tests. Yeah, she had tests in school. I didn't have tests in that grade. I was like, "Well," and in my naivete, I was like, "Well, they must know. They're the experts. So they must know that giving tests is a good thing and that's going to help her out." And I continued to have her go. I mean, eventually, obviously, I stopped, but I just was like, "Oh, okay, this must be the best thing for them to do." And it just made her so upset to get anything wrong, and she felt like if she got one problem wrong, that she was a failure, and thank the Lord that we took her out, and she knows that making mistakes does not mean that you are a failure, just means you got something wrong. It just means there's an area of correction that we can work on, and so, my pain point here is when I'm saying, "Is your child behind?" is to ask yourself those questions. Behind what? Behind whom? If it's the school system, we already covered that in depth. But really ask yourself that and look at your child as an individual. So maybe you are thinking, wow, okay, they are not quite catching on to things. Don't be afraid to pull in some supplemental materials. Don't be afraid to pull in some other people to help out. Don't be afraid to slow down. Don't be afraid to alter course. Don't be afraid to do maybe say a math. Maybe they are in quote unquote third grade and they're not quite at that level. Do the second grade. Tear off that cover, tear off any reference to it that shows that they're in second grade, and help them just get really good at their math at that level. Not everybody's going to go on to crazy higher levels in math. Not everybody's going to go on to higher levels in science or foreign language or be in some honors English or anything like that. And that's okay. They're no greater or no less. Each of our children are individual people, and we have to look at them like that. God created them like that. God created them for a purpose and created them as they are with a personality and the certain gifts and talents and abilities. And homeschooling allows us that time for them to discover those and to really lean into those and understand, as I've mentioned before, somebody who's, let's just say an example would be they're an amazing opera singer. I've never been to the opera, but I'm just trying to think of something a little bit out there. They're an amazing opera singer. Do you think that they are behind the scenes when they are in the back getting their hair and makeup done, that they're back there doing some complex mathematical equations or they're back there with some crazy science experiment? No. Oftentimes our brains are a little bit wired towards maybe English and history and that kind of stuff, the arts. And then others are just maybe a little bit more inclined to be really good naturally when it comes to math and to science and to grasp those different subjects. And there's nothing right or wrong. As adults, that's how we are. So why can't we allow our children to be like that too? Instead of putting them into a box and giving them tests, because honestly, to know whether they are ahead or behind, you would have to measure them with some type of metric and then measure those scores against something. And who decides? Who came up with whatever that is that you're measuring them against? My kids in New York, that the state we live in, have had to do testing. And I hate it. I hate doing it every single year. It is a waste of time when we could be exploring the world. We could be learning about things. We could be doing so many other wonderful things and pouring into our kids and giving life. But instead, we're sitting there filling in bubbles. But I don't really feel like being arrested. So, and I don't feel like my child being put into public school. So I'm going to play their game. I'm going to do what we're supposed to do. I'm going to do it in an honorable way. We're not going to cheat at it or anything like that. We're going to do it in an honorable way and do it. And then we're going to move on with our life. And so they have had to do some testing in elementary, in middle, and then comes to high school. Every single year, we have to do a standardized test. And my kids every single year are like, wow, this is not hard at all. They're like, is it's so so my kids will be like, is this all I need to know? I'm like, no, 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 no. We are going above and beyond that because we are not just looking at some base level. We're really going to dive into in deep to things that we want to know about, and we're going to learn more about the world and read really good books and explore the world and take part in things and get out into our community and really get you set up for your next steps in life. And so when it comes to the tests, I think there might be an episode. If there is, I'll drop it in the show notes. I know I did one about grade levels, but when it comes to tests, yeah, just pass. I pass on those. If I lived in a state where I didn't have to do standardized tests, I would not do it. But it's also that's coming from somebody who has to do it. So I know sometimes in states where there is no type of metric like that, parents get worked up and they're really worried about it. Don't. Enjoy the freedom that you have. So is your child behind? No, they are not. They are where they are right now. If you feel that there is something that you need to do to come alongside them to help encourage them, there's so many resources. I encourage you to do that. If you feel like you need to slow down in something or skip ahead and go really fast in certain subjects, go ahead and do that. You have the freedom to do that. They are not behind. God has created them wonderfully, and just lean into that. Before I close out, don't forget the Black Friday sale this week only. You are going to get busy this week, I promise you. Whether you're traveling out of town or you're hosting or you're just going over to grandma and grandpa's house on Thanksgiving Day, I know you're going to get busy and forget. So I suggest you do this sooner rather than later, and it can sit in your email inbox, and then you can go ahead and pick up on it after the holiday weekend. But you can save 35% on your homeschool blueprint and the tidy home with the Black Friday sale. Use the coupon code Black Friday 2024 on either of those courses or both of the courses. You'll have to go to each one of those checkouts to go ahead and purchase those. The links are in the show notes, or you can go straight to littlebylittlehomeschool.com, and at the top or at the menu, whether it depends on if you're looking at a desktop or on a phone, but on the menu, you'll see the blueprint as well as the tidy home option. Friend, happy Thanksgiving, and I promise to be back here just to pop in real quick to say hello and happy Thanksgiving to you on Thursday.
Thank you for listening, friend. I'd love to connect with you more. You can find social media links in the show notes and share this episode with a friend who could use a boost to her homeschool. See you back here real soon.